Women's Soccer Review Podcast with Duane Rollins and Jonathan Tannenwald on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Women's Soccer Review here on the Sports Podcasting Network. I'm Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer, in Philadelphia at home, as we all will be for quite a while. Philadelphia is one of many cities on lockdown during the coronavirus outbreak, as is the city where our guest today joins from, Kelsey Trainor, who is in New York. She does a lot of different things, including contributing to Equalizer Soccer on soccer legal matters, which is where we're going on this show. And folks, we're going to go into the weeds. We're not really going to apologize about it, because Kelsey and I have spent a lot of time and a lot of money, frankly, in the federal court legal filing system, getting everything we can out of there about the U.S. women's soccer team's lawsuit over equal pay discrimination and lots of other things. And we're going to talk about that on this show. And I will introduce Kelsey as follows. I was going about my business on Twitter one day and noticed that at one point some of my tweets and such were being retweeted and liked by this big shot producer in New York with experience at CBS. And I was trying to figure out what was going on here, because I know a lot of people at CBS, but most of them are not involved in soccer, so I was a little surprised. And it turns out that Kelsey does a whole lot of things. So I'm going to let her explain that for herself. And Kelsey, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I kind of dabble in a lot of it. My day job, my full-time day job, is that I'm in-house counsel for a media company run by Dan Abrams from ABC News. And so we have a bunch of different platforms and a TV network there. But one of the sites that I write for under our media company kind of let me start dabbling in sports. I used to play college sports. I coached college sports for some time before law school. And so just having an interest in the space of sports and being a lawyer, I started writing on the legal side of a lot of things, whether it means, pay equality or, Title IX issues or NCAA issues. So that's the sum of it. I did work for the television show Blue Bloods, so that's where my CBS comes in there, and I do some other stuff and production on the side as well.
You also went to law school down the street from my alma mater, if I'm not mistaken. I spent 4 years on the other side of Market Street from you.
Oh, right. Yeah, I went to Drexel Law, go Dragons. And I'm from Philadelphia, so big time Philadelphia sports fan as well.
So let's get into this. I have a couple of things in PACER, which is the formal name of the legal court filing system down here in the U.S. You'll hear me use that word a lot, so you should know what it is. I have a couple things open here, and I want to start. I'm going to assume that the listeners out there know most of what has happened, especially the big stuff that we've all written about. And the latest round of things is something that you caught because you were paying attention when a lot of the rest of us weren't, which is the judge in the case ruled just a couple of days ago that this thing was not really going to go to a full trial and get argued before the court out there. The court will consider what's at stake only on what's been filed. No oral arguments. The court is trying to do some business at a time when the court systems in a lot of the country are not going to be able to do a lot of business, especially in Southern California, where this court is. And the key line in here, as you wrote, everything that's been filed apparently is now on the record, including the big filing by U.S. Soccer, which used some quite clearly sexist and derogatory language about men and women, and that led to Carlos Cordero's resignation and a whole bunch of other things, as folks know. And that was really what turned what was already a fire into a huge conflagration. And I want to focus on that particular brief staying on the record, Kelsey, because U.S. Soccer petitioned to have it struck. They apologized, or they tried to apologize. Right. Carlos Cordero claimed he didn't know anything about it, which is either dereliction of duty if he didn't or dereliction of duty if he did. Cindy Cohn claimed she didn't know anything about it, even though she was on a committee that U.S. Soccer convened to oversee all the legal matters. Apparently the oversight wasn't good enough, at the very least. So U.S. Soccer petitions to have this thing struck. The judge didn't say no.
Yeah,
so
I guess kind of like to put it all in perspective, right? So the judge's latest order is about the motions for summary judgment. Now, motions for summary judgment are very common. It's a very common way to get some or all of the case decided before trial. Sometimes they're granted, sometimes they're not. There's a standard that they have to meet, basically saying that, there's enough evidence to meet the standard that would be at a civil trial, that, everything is in favor of this side or the other side. And a lot of it, if there's some facts to kind of still be sorted out, then the judge will deny it. Or if it doesn't necessarily meet this burden of proof, then again, the judge will deny it and it will go to trial. So in this case, what the judge did was he said it's common to happen, but because for this case, there was a hearing scheduled on the motions for March 30th. Now, obviously, the coronavirus, the global pandemic that we're in, everything has been affected. And the courts specifically, they're not meant for this virtual world, basically. There's still some places where you can't even e-file. You have to actually go to the courthouse and file things. And so it's significant in the way, in the sense that, the players would have been great for them to go to this hearing, or their lawyers to go to this hearing, and to kind of harp down on these arguments in court in front of the judge. It would have been an oral argument, similar to, what you see people up there arguing on both sides. No evidence would have been presented. It just would have been this argument on the briefs. And the judge said, now, listen, it's not happening. There's no oral argument. I'm going to take everything that's on the record with these motions for summary judgment and any exhibits attached to them, and I'm going to decide whether or not this is going to be granted based only on those things, nothing more. And so, as you said, what is still on the record are these briefs from U.S. Soccer that were, incredibly controversial and led to this absolute firestorm. And U.S. Soccer actually did not ever petition or do anything on the record in the court process to try to remove this. What they did do was issue this public statement saying that they were not going to keep arguing that, right? But the way that a motion for summary judgment works is you file a motion, you file a reply brief, and then you file a reply to the other side's reply brief. So in this case, we've had a summary motion for summary judgment. Then we had U.S. Soccer's reply brief, which was I believe it was the March 9th filings. And then we had the reply to the reply. And the reply to the reply is where they did not re-argue these completely sexist and misogynistic points. But they are still in the record, and they're still something that the judge is going to be reading, and he's going to be reading all of the deposition transcripts and expert reports and numbers that are attached to those motions and to those reply briefs.
There were a couple of things in there, and again, we're in the weeds, folks. That's what this show is going to be. There were a couple of things in there that I noticed where, and these were like little things and like statements of facts and disputes of the other side's facts and things like that, where U.S. Soccer said, yeah, we're pulling this off of our brief. It was a couple of small things. I think it was, in fact, one of the ones where they asked Carly Lloyd about, here we go, found it. They wanted to, in their exact words, where U.S. Soccer no longer seeks to rely on the statements previously submitted as uncontroverted facts and have omitted them from its reply. And
right. They omitted them from the reply. I think that's the point, is that they're not relying on them anymore, but they're still in the record. Those arguments have not been stricken from the record.
Okay.
And if I'm the players, I don't want them stricken from the record because it's proof in and of itself of discrimination.
And that's, right. And that's where I think a lot of people out there are wondering, can can the judge say, yes, you can do that or not? And the answer seems to be that the judge is going to let it stand, in which case U.S. Soccer is in big trouble. Duane, what do you got?
Up here in Canada, I have a very high-level view of this case, obviously following it as close as I can. But what struck me when these briefs came out with the language that they used is I couldn't wrap my head around, Kelsey, what the legal purpose of this was. So I'm asking you, is there a legal argument that they can win using this argument, or was this just them dropping the ball in every way?
They have good legal arguments in their brief. I will not say that this is one of them. The idea that the women do not perform equal work on jobs requiring equal effort and responsibility. Their argument about the collective bargaining agreements and having, different contracts between the men and the women, that's a good argument. Their argument about the fact that they were bargained for by the union, that's a good argument. Their argument that men and women are inherently different by birth and therefore it's not equal work, it's not a great argument. I will say that the first motion, or the original motion for summary judgment, the language was not as strong. And I don't think that it was evident that was kind of, part of the argument, but it wasn't so explosive. Legally, you learn this kind of day one in law school. Legally, the only way you can kind of differentiate between men and women to pay them differently or to treat them differently in any sort of way is the fact that women give birth and men don't. So anything that has to do with that, you'll see exceptions and you'll see arguments about there not being, equal performance or equality in, any type of working conditions. But that's not the case here. And so I think that them arguing that kind of from the beginning and having their line of questioning be that, it wasn't smart. It's not something that's unheard of. It's not something that's never been argued before. But it's not their strongest argument, and it certainly doesn't help them from a public perception perspective as well.
So I'm not a lawyer. I only have a bunch in my family, and I've grown up sort of with legalese in my head because of the drinking water. But one of the things I've seen over time is that if you want to win a case, if you think you have a winning argument, don't you try to keep it narrow instead of throwing everything at the wall, which is and it seems to me U.S. Soccer threw everything at the wall, and it might cost them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a legal strategy, which, we can get into the next part of what you had talked about before about who knew what. But it is a legal strategy to kind of throw everything out there and see what sticks. But you're correct in saying that, listen, if you have these arguments that, to me, their best argument is the difference in this pay structure. And it is hard to compare because of one versus the other. And to me, that was their best argument. The second best one was that they have these that they have a union, the contracts were bargained for, and if you take issue with it, then take it up with your union. So, I personally would have left the last argument out, but it's a strategy, and I don't think it's a good one.
We can get into that later or some other time. I want to close by asking this. I come at this, as I said, from somebody who knows a bit of legalese and has covered this team for a long time and knows the people. And you have it, from a lawyer's perspective and now coming into journalism. I've said this on social media a couple times now. I think that there is a number. It might not be $66.7 million, but there is a number that is the amount that is really out of U.S. Soccer's own coffers that they sort of owe in back pay to the women over the years for, per match fees and bonuses and per diems and travel and all of this other stuff that is not FIFA prize money per se. There's that amount of money plus something on top that Cindy Cohn is going to come to the table with, having been a player and understanding where they're coming from, and says, here's a number. It's not $66.7 million, but can we get, whether it's that number or something close to it, can we get there? And then from the plaintiff's side, and I did say this a couple nights ago, and I know, Kelsey, you saw it. If Molly Levinson keeps saying, who's the spokesperson for the legal team on the players' side, keeps saying equal pay and nothing else, isn't she at some point going to have to define what that is a little more specifically?
I'm with you on the number, right? I don't think it's 67 million. I think that after the motions for summary judgment and the damage that U.S. Soccer has done, I think the number is higher than I had originally would have, predicted. But I don't think Molly Levinson's going to change, what she's going to say. I think the players and the lawyers for the players do have to come back, in any negotiation with a number that's realistic. And I think it's twofold. I think it's one, a number that reflects, all of the back pay and all of the past issues. And then two, it's fixing, it's fixing the situation going forward. I think that's a key component of, a settlement and what's to happen. And the contract going forward with the players. And I think if you get a decent number, I agree it's not 67 million, but I think you will see a significant number coupled with some promising changes going forward as the end result.
Okay, Kelsey, thank you very much for coming on, and good luck staying safe and healthy and sane with everything going on up there in New York. And we'll hope to have you on again sometime.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Welcome back here on the Women's Soccer Review on the Sports Podcasting Network. This is Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer. That was a great chat with Kelsey. As I said, we got into the weeds for a while, but we told you we were gonna, and it's something that Kelsey and I do a lot, lines of our work. Duane is here. And Duane, what do you think of all that?
Yeah, this is obviously getting into the weeds is necessary when you're talking about a court case. So I think it was a valuable resource that we just tapped into there, Jonathan, and I quite enjoyed listening to that. Learned quite a bit. Should have went to law school really, but I did not, and I don't have it in the water here. So I'm going to ask you some questions that are more emotional based, I guess, Jonathan, and I'm going to start with this. What the hell was USSF thinking? I'm baffled by their choice of language here, and I don't know if you can provide me with an answer because I don't know if anyone can, but what were they thinking?
I think it's what some of the people there really think. And I think it betrays things that those of us on the inside already knew about Jay Berhalter and Sunil Gulati and even Carlos Cordero. And certainly it betrays with Cordero, if he doesn't think every word of it, then he was not. If you're the president of U.S. Soccer, you've got to read something like that yourself before it goes out. And if you're going to sit there and say you didn't know what was happening, then either you're not telling the truth, which is dereliction of duty, or you are telling the truth, which is dereliction of duty.
Yeah.
And I would certainly think that the chief in-house legal person at U.S. Soccer, Lydia Walke, she's been placed on administrative leave pending an external review of what happened here that Cindy Cohn, the new president, ordered. She's got to take responsibility for that, and then you've got to look at who she reports to. Well, she reports to the CEO. There was no CEO from September until this week, which is, again, part of the problem. And I asked earlier this week, Cindy Cohn and the new CEO, Will Wilson, had a conference call with the media. It was their first, sort of public remarks with some questions attached, not just, statements and press releases. And I said, what is the official hierarchy on oversight of Lydia Walke, the in-house legal counsel? And the answer is she reports to the CEO, and there was no CEO. So then what? Well, is it the president in the interim? We never really knew. Is it the board? Well, now you've got an interesting problem. And I wonder, Duane, if there are parallels up in Canada about the following. There was this little ad hoc committee put together to do the legal oversight with this stuff. It was Cindy Cohn. It was Patty Hart, who's an independent director on the board, has nothing to do with soccer. And it was Tim Turney, who's the vice chair of U.S. Youth Soccer.
Okay.
Now, in U.S. soccer, as I believe to be the case with the Canadian Soccer Association, from my understanding of it, feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, the bulk of the membership is youth and adult amateur clubs and leagues and organizations and so on in the states and the regions across the country.
Absolutely.
So
non-competitive for the most part, yeah.
We don't know what they think of this equal pay stuff. We know what the fans think. We know what the professional game thinks. We don't know what the youth and adult amateur organizations that are the bulk of U.S. soccer's actual voting membership that put the president and the vice president and the board in their positions. We don't know what they think, and they don't much talk about it. Why? Well, we know what they do talk about, which is registration fees and, various other things, and in a couple of cases with the adult amateurs pro rel. We might conclude from that maybe they don't care about this so much as the rest of the public does, and if they don't, well, maybe that's a problem.
Yeah, it's mostly about driving their revenue streams, which, as you say, are the registrations, and they may not be all that interested in giving what they would see privileged people more money, essentially. Not that the women make anything compared to the men, but certainly compared to nothing, right? So it might be something that's happening there. Jonathan, the language that was used to me struck me as emotional. It struck me as a reactionary language that maybe was that the women were getting under their skin and they wanted to prove some point. It was ill-guided, obviously, but do you think that there was some emotions that went into this? There was a little bit of lack of perspective that happened that caused them to put this third argument in?
I don't necessarily. I think that they were doing some throwing of everything at the wall to seeing what sticks. And I think that this is what some people within the walls of U.S. soccer and in some of these positions of power, and I say some of the positions of power for a reason I'll get to in a minute. I think this is what some of them, and they don't all work there anymore, what they actually believe. And it even though it was in its bluntest form in the more recent filings, they had been going in that, as Meg Linehan of The Athletic and others have pointed out, they had been going in that direction for a while. And then they finally got there.
Yeah.
I want to note one other thing, by the way, about this ad hoc committee that I mentioned a minute ago. You have an independent board member. You have a youth administrator. Nobody from the pro council. And I get it. Don Garber is not perfect, but he wants women's soccer to succeed in this country. He may have his own financial interest in that, but my response to that is, if he's offering the help, do you take it or not? Mm-hmm. And there was nobody from the Athletes Council, which is current and former players, not just senior men's and women's, but the Paralympian, the Paralympians, disabled teams, the beach soccer teams, etc. I would like to think that if anybody from the Pro Council had been on that committee and had been paying attention, they would have said, hey, no. And the Pro Council is not just Don Garber. It's Alec Papadakis, who is involved with the USL, and now Steve Malik, who is North Carolina FC and the North Carolina Courage, has just come in replacing Papadakis. You know that Malik would not have stood for that at all. I don't think Garber would have either. And the fact that he came out with a public statement against Cordero was, I think, a significant part of Cordero eventually resigning. Because even if it was theatrics, Garber and Cordero were quite close, and Garber turning on him matters.
For sure. I mean, how quick this fell certainly means that there was a lot of surprise with the language that was used. Jonathan, as Kelsey and others have pointed out, there is a pathway that does see the United States Soccer Federation winning this case, or at least getting a settlement which is much closer to what they are looking for than the women are. But that said, with this argument, with this language, have they lost? Might they win the battle, but have already lost the war?
Well, they've already said they want to settle the case. They don't want to see it out.
Sure.
So the question is, will that happen, and will the players let it happen? And then it's just going to be what the number is. That's all it's going to come down to.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer of where that's going to lead because I don't know. But that is where the players and Cindy Cohn, who's the new president, who, as I said, is a former player, was on the 1999 World Cup team, the 1996 Olympic team, and various others. A very, very decorated player in her time. Has the very public support of Mia Hamm and Julie Foudy. And you can say that Foudy's always been on this, which she has been. But Mia Hamm coming forward in the way that she has to publicly back Cohn. Mia Hamm is not somebody who is a big talker in the way that Foudy is. And I know Julie fairly well. I know Mia a little bit. I know Julie. Julie, of course, she's a talker. She's on social media. She's on television, et cetera, et cetera. Mia Hamm does not raise her voice a ton.
Sure.
So when she does, and she's Mia Hamm, obviously, so it matters a lot when she does. And if she believes that Cindy Cohn is going to get this fixed, then I'm inclined to trust that. Can they shut the door and get it done? And then can Cindy Cohn turn around and call up Nike, for example, and Volkswagen and Coca-Cola and the other big sponsors and say, look, this is the number. Can you help? And I would like to think that Nike will say, yes, we will.
Fair enough. I guess the question I have from that is, obviously the short term is about getting the numbers, getting this resolved. But what does healing look like? What does a pathway towards a better relationship between these two parties look like, and how do they start that process?
I just think it's settling. I really do. And there, a new CBA when the time comes that Will Wilson will probably be at the bargaining table for, that settles a lot of this stuff. And by the way, speaking of that, the U.S. men have not had a working CBA in 15 months now. And that is going to be a part of this. The U.S. Men's Players Association has publicly backed the women. Some people have said, well, it's in their own interest because if the women get a raise, then the men will the next time around too. And again, I would say, do you want their help or not?
Yeah, sure.
And I say that as somebody who covers men's and women's soccer, obviously, which not everybody does. Some people cover just the men. Some people cover just the women. But you've got to get the men settled. You've got to get the women settled. If over the course of those two CBAs, you can get the match fee to the same number and some of the other things to the same number, I don't think the men are going to object per se to the women continuing to have central contracts if they want to.
Fair enough. Let's move it slightly away, adjacent anyway. Jonathan, obviously with this, there comes a fallout, and that is that there is a vacancy at the top now again, and that will not be filled, I guess, till February at the annual general meeting, if I understand the dates right.
Not quite.
Okay.
She's got the job.
Okay.
She's got the job until the AGM next February, at which point she can decide to run again for another year, which would fulfill the length of Carlos Cordero's term in office, and then decide whether she would run for another 4 years.
So my question is, what kind of, I guess it will come down to how well she performs. Is that a fair way to put that in terms of what kind of battle there will be for that position? Because it certainly was very competitive the last time.
If she settles this case in a way that makes everybody happy and wants to keep the job, I have a hard time seeing her lose it.
Fair enough, Jonathan.
And if somebody runs against her, John Mata ran against her for the vice presidential election the last time around, which I think was this year, I think.
Mm-hmm.
This past month and a half, 2 months ago. And Mata, on the matter of principle, was doing a good thing because otherwise the election would have been uncontested. And there were some people who wanted to see Mata win for the sake of somebody else winning. And I said, wait a minute, I'm not sure you want Cindy Cohn to be the person who loses here. Because she was a big bulwark against Jay Berhalter, who, as people know, was the chief commercial officer, who had his tentacles in everything, including a lot of this. If Cohn gets this done, and if between Cohn and Wilson they get a new CBA for the men, I have a hard time believing that if Cohn doesn't want the job, she won't be able to keep it at least through 22. And then if she wants 4 more years, she's the president going into 26 and through a U.S. bid to host the 27 Women's World Cup. I don't think any of that would be a bad thing at all either, if she gets this done.
All right, couple quick scoreboard questions before we wrap here. The Olympics, of course, have now been postponed until 2021, perhaps in the spring, perhaps in the summer. Does that change much when it comes to the U.S. Women's National Team?
We're going to find out. I mean, it brings Alex Morgan is in the picture for sure.
Sure.
I know that. What happens to Ali Krieger, Becky Sauerbrunn? Obviously, Carly Lloyd is the biggest question of all. She wants to keep going. I don't know what's going to happen. I
don't think anyone knows at this point, but yeah, it is a fair thing to think about. Certainly, from the Canadian perspective, the big question up here is does Christine Sinclair have another 12 months in her legs? Who knows? It does change a lot when it comes to this shift that no one anticipated, Jonathan, and we can't really control, which is unfortunate. So maybe
the men, by the way, big questions about the men.
Oh, for sure. Well, we don't even know what the tournament's going to look like, whether it's going to be U23.
We'll discuss that on Soccer Today, maybe instead of on here.
Yeah, for exactly. All right. Well, on that note, Jonathan, I think we'll wrap Women's Soccer Review for this week. Thanks again to Kelsey for joining us. For Jonathan Tannenwald, I'm Duane Rollins. This has been the Women's Soccer Review. Stay safe and wash your hands.